Hello, and welcome to your first edition of Adam's Corner. I'll be your host, Adam. Today I'll be discussing with you what I find to be the most interesting quality of Lippard's Quaker City, mainly the aspect of that differentiates itself from the other early to mid-19th century texts we've read in this class. Mainly the deviation from religious morality into economic morality, which one could argue is no morality at all. It can be survival morality, which is still not morality, but a game theory geared towards hierarchical domination, power, and survival. In essence, my thesis would be roughly, Quaker City reveals when and how America diverted from its founding principles to modern hypocrisy we know it as today. There's a clear distinction between this novel and the previous novels, being that Lamplighter, Hope Leslie, the hermaphrodite, and of course in the case of Nat Turner, lived in a highly spiritual world, and for that reason, let's make sure my mute is off. Okay. For that reason, a religious world. We might still get crumbs of religion in Quaker City, but it's fastly being glazed over by the freshly baked cake that is the 19th century industrial age. Interestingly enough, the industrial age into the corporate age was largely caused by, as far as literature I've assessed, the federal government's need for capital rather. This need to raise capital led Big Brother to sell off government-owned land, leading to almost all of American land to become privately owned, promotion of trade, into the erection of large financial institutions and corporations, as we read in Quaker City. You can argue that those values are still foundational to modern America, but now we're dealing with semantics, which was the point of trying to formulate some sort of agreed upon defining term for what America meant then versus what it meant now, what it means now, sorry, regarding ideals, values. Surely few of the OG Americans considered the levels of taxation we have now to be appropriate. Surely few, nor were they fighting with their great-grandkids to have the ability to eat at McDonald's every night, because it's the only thing they could afford. Times have changed, is what I mean to say. Anyways, this isn't a political or economic debate. I'm just trying to clarify some terms for the sake of being on the same page. America today is not the same America in the 18th and 19th century. No matter where you come from on the political scale, we can agree on that. Surely it's still about pursuing freedoms, but it's more about something else. And that's what Lippard is getting at. I believe his text pinpoints the separation from existential purpose to industrial economic purpose. In Lippard's words, the skeleton monk had selected the members of his band. Here we are, lawyers from the court, doctors from the school, and judges from the bench, puffy-faced editor side by side with a magazine proprietor. Here were reputable married men of all classes. Page 56. We gave up our freedom to pursue greed, and now virtually every aspect of life has become commodified. Maybe that's what Lippard meant when Mary said, I am polluted, brother, and am not worthy of the slightest tear you shed for me, page 145. Lippard supplies us with enough evidence that the reason Mary becomes polluted is because of the environment, to change value system from religious morality to something resembling social Darwinism. David Reynolds' introduction into Massachusetts Press edition certainly agrees with me. Reynolds writes, Lippard is showing how women in a twisted society driven by lust and money become victims of massive-scale male power struggle, failing prey to male constructed images of romance and social advancements. Page 23 of the intro. Before that, he says, because Lippard's overriding goal is to replicate in fiction a society he regards as nightmarish and depraved, he creates an entire nightmare world that is always threatening to destroy ordinary perceptions, page 21. For the record of the intro, for the record, this does not sound too far off from our current constant perception challenging evolution of technology. On a different note, ordinary perception is rather vague. I don't know many who share the same perception on every level. It's this very fact that makes conflicts in everyday relationships and good fiction. But what Reynolds is getting at, I think, is perception in terms of collective paradigm shift from shared morality, which allowed individuals and groups to trust each other, to the survival of the fittest morality, illustrated in text, which again is no morality at all. Lippard says 2 candidates are running for poison. One puts a pill in the other's brandy and kills him off. On the eve of the election, delightful world it would make. Tom poisons Dick, Dick poisons Harry, Harry poisons his wife, and his wife poisons the devil knows who, page 211. So, It's nearly impossible to trace these things back to one exact moment since time is connected in causal linearity. However, there was the creation of a survey system by the Confederate Congress in 1785, which facilitated private land ownership via competitive markets. Long story short, the government needed revenue. They got it by selling land to private owners or claims groups. This laid the groundwork for antebellum trade, which would lead to innovation and industrialization. The early 19th century would quickly become known as the golden age for the capitalist revolution and possessive individualism. This brought more revenue to state government and federal, which inspired the government to encourage the American entrepreneur spirit even more. The law became easily manipulated by the wealthy as the largest capitalists began working closely with top lawmakers and officials. In essence, all purpose took on spiritual purpose in early America before transitioning into industry-driven existence. And you can argue that the rags to which the story moralized wealth is both causes and reward for virtue, that the wealthy were still those who determined what those spiritual virtues were and how they were attained. The difference here in spiritual morality is that the group focuses on how one is to live their lives according to the higher plane of existence and a transcendent ideal. The morality in industrial America is illustrated by Lippard, as illustrated by Lippard, is no morality at all, and thus no one is resembling game theory. No one is to be trusted without inserting a new formula for behavior, mainly one witnessed in primates resembling game theory or fear-based systems of behaving. And again, you can argue that living with the fear of God is fear-based system, but one could rely on a system of behavior governed by a force of the group's most advanced thinkers, or if not in a higher power, to determine one's fate, instead of that fate being determined by the monks of Monk Hall, as Lippard might put it. Religious spiritualist Puritans escaped prosecution from Britain into Holland before traveling to the New World, transforming them into pilgrims. Again, the purpose of this early European settlers was to have freedom to pursue their spiritual journeys. They saw America as a virgin land, as pure themselves, to be as pure in themselves as chosen by God to ascend to heaven and through the free land. But here's where the dimensions deepen. It was not an easy life, and the American government had yet to stabilize itself, yet alone establish itself as a reckoning force in the West. Government's purpose of capital and resources was what led them to prioritize industrialization over spiritual purpose, as much as it hurts to say. A full soul does not put bread on the table. American capitalism was born as all cosmic forces are born, out of necessity. However, was the corruption that followed a necessary consequence? Perhaps a Hobbesian would say yes, the natural consequence of turning a collective value away from spiritual enlightenment and towards economic gain instead. But almost every facet of American official life is said to have been subject to bribery during the industrial age of Philadelphia, according to Reynolds and Lippard. One wealthy elite even admitted of the Bank of the United States fraud, saying, "Indeed, it is villainy on a most enormous scale. I believe there have been more corruption and fraud in the country for the last 5 years than in all of England for the last 500. Page 34 of Reynolds' introduction. Now that we have some ideas of what the shift was and when it occurred, we're still left with many questions like, what caused such severe and ubiquitous corruption? Yes, greed, but what caused such malicious greed? In other words, what was Lippard's comments on greed in America? Furthermore, what does this greed and corruption have to do with the abuse of women, mainly prostitutes? But why add Mary in there too? Why make women something to be polluted by men with no mention of polluted men? Unless we consider the monks and Monk polluted men. That is, the city made of men polluting women as polluting itself. Why down with the Pope on page 266? Why trust the mechanic over the petty aristocrat on page 184? What virtue does the mechanic claim to that aristocrat does not? And those are my questions. I hope that you've enjoyed this edition of Adam's Corner, and that your life remains relatively cod-free for the time being. Signing off.